Greetings, everyone. I am Syed Ali Ziad Jafri, and I welcome you to another episode of the CISPR webinar series, in which we aim to bring to you quality discussions on a bevy of security, strategic, and foreign policy issues. Today, hours after Iran struck a major US military base in Qatar to avenge Washington's illegal strikes on its nuclear facilities, President Donald Trump announced that both Tehran and Tel Aviv have agreed to a ceasefire. While it is a positive development, the situation is still precarious and fluid, not least because of concerns over Iran's nuclear program, the nuclear nonproliferation regime, and Israel's strategic objectives. The dangerous three-way escalation happened on the heels of yet another intense, high stakes crisis between India and Pakistan, which brought a number of new dynamics to the fore. Both crises ought to be deeply studied with respect to alliance politics, emerging and disruptive technologies, and the changing coercive value of both conventional and nuclear weapons. To discuss some of these issues, we are fortunate to be joined by prominent nuclear scholar Dr. Mansoor Ahmed. Allow me to say a few words about him. Dr. Mansoor Ahmed is an honorary lecturer in the Strategic and Defence Studies Center, Australian National University. He has worked at CISS Islamabad as a senior research fellow from 2018 until 2022 and as lecturer in the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Quaid-i-Azam University from 2011 until 2015. He has held fellowships at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center um, from 2015 until 2018 and at the Cooperative Monitoring Center, Sandia National Laboratories in 2013. His research interests include various aspects of Pakistani and Indian nuclear programs, policies, and emerging force postures, fissile materials, military modernization, and strategic stability issues in South Asia. His research work has been published by the Belfer Center, the Stimson Center, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the US Naval Postgraduate School. He is also the author of Pakistan's Pathway to the Bomb and holds a PhD in International Relations from Quaid-i-Azam University, Islamabad. Thank you so much, Dr. Mansoor, for taking out the time to join me in this podcast. It
Thank
has
you for
been
having me.
a pleasure to discuss various aspects of nuclear weapons, nuclear security, and a whole lot more with you through various platforms and in various fora. So we are well and truly in what scholars describe as as the third nuclear age. Um, you have done a lot of work across a spectrum of issues, ranging from the technical side of nuclear technology to the doctrinal and posture side of the equation. Uh, I want to pick your brains on a very important issue that the world is right now facing. As I had talked in my introduction about the ceasefire in Iran, um, we know for a fact that the Iran nuclear program has been a bone of contention in international relations, particularly in the Middle East, for a good part of 22 years. Now, the debate has revolved around Iran's uranium enrichment. And even if you look at the debate in the last 10 15 days, it has centered on the idea of Iran having the ability to go nuclear within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Um, Given your technical knowledge and background, I just want you to tell our viewers as to what does this 60% enriched uranium mean? Is it is it actually the case that Iran is nearing a bomb? I know you've written, including for our platforms, a lot about Iran's breakout capacity and capability. Uh, Enrichment, while a very important component of nuclear weaponization, is not the be all and all of nuclear weaponization. So I want you to shed some light on how near Iran is, and also delve into how do you look at the recent US strikes on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan facilities. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Ali. I think this is a good time to have a discussion on these issues because what happens is that cherry picking of certain types of capabilities has long-term policy implications, which seems to be the case with Iran. So Iran essentially has mastered the front end of the nuclear fuel cycle. And this is its greatest singular engineering and scientific accomplishment in its nuclear program. So the nuclear fuel cycle essentially is a series of steps required to produce nuclear fuel for a reactor. It can be a power reactor, or it can be a research reactor, or any other type of like a fast breeder reactor. And the same fuel cycle can be used to produce fuel for nuclear weapons in the form of fissile material. So there are two types of fissile materials, weapons grade highly enriched uranium and plutonium. So Iran has acquired the capability to produce uranium enriched to about 60%. And that means that it can produce yellow cake. It can convert that yellow cake into uranium oxide and uranium hexafluoride gas, which is part of the uranium conversion process. Iran has a uranium conversion plant at Isfahan and the ability to produce uranium metal, which is also there at Isfahan. Now, in order to enrich uranium, there are two essential components are required. One is the feedstock in the form of natural uranium hexafluoride gas or UF6, and a plant to enrich uranium using centrifuge technology. So Iran had some difficulty in the early phase of the program in producing good quality UF6, but they've managed to produce high purity UF6, and they've graduated from IR1 to IR6 gas centrifuges. They have accumulated around 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. Now, most of the effort in terms of the time, in terms of the number of centrifuges and the cascades required to go from 0.7% to 90% is already covered when a state is able to enrich uranium from 3 to 5%, which is for nuclear power reactors, also known as low enriched uranium. So the International Atomic Energy Agency defines low enriched uranium enriched to about 19.99%, and 20% and above is highly enriched uranium, but that is not weapons grade yet. And 60% is not weapons grade, but since most of the effort has already been utilized in producing 60%, it would take Iran a very short span of time to move from 60% to 90% if it chooses to do so. But having said that, even if today, assuming that Iran has 90% enriched uranium, weapons grade, that is like a bullet, and you still need a gun to fire that bullet. And detonating fissile material so that it generates sufficient chain reaction is not like detonating ordinary explosives. That requires a trigger mechanism and a physics package and a workable theoretical design of a nuclear device. And that will require Iran to conduct a series of subcritical or hydrodynamic cold tests without fissile materials. So in order to test the physics package and the trigger mechanism, if it works or not. And that includes high explosive lenses that have to be machined to very high tolerances. That includes a neutron source, that includes high-speed electronic triggering circuits, and all of that has to be machined with great precision. And the reason why countries conduct cold tests and hot tests is essentially to validate the efficiency of a nuclear device without the fissile material. And in terms of hot tests, fissile material is used. Now, India, for example, in 1998 conducted 5 tests. But 3 out of those 5 tests, including one test of a thermonuclear device, fizzled or produced a fissile yield. So that means that only 2 of their tests produced the desired yields. So Iran will have to conduct a series of subcritical tests or hydrodynamic tests, and those will likely be detected by the CTBTO or other means on the ground. And then that design will have to be mated for a payload on a ballistic or a cruise missile. And those tests will have to be separate from the cold tests. And then Iran will need to ensure that its delivery system is able to reach the target without being intercepted, given the kind of missile defense systems that have been deployed across the Middle East. So currently, Iran has only succeeded at producing enriched uranium up to 60%. They have not and the International Atomic Energy Agency's Director General, only yesterday, he reiterated that there is no evidence that Iran has a nuclear weapons program in place. So we
Even the
can,
report that was released on May 31 did not talk about, specifically mentioned that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program in place. So
yes.
that has to be made pretty clear. So taking taking off from that, so when experts and scholars say that it is about a political decision that the Ayatollah has to take, that political decision is about it is not about just uranium enrichment. It is also about the processes that you have so adroitly detailed in your answer. So this based on this, we can certainly say that all reports which said Iran is 2 weeks or 3 weeks away from going nuclear um, were incorrect, and they were fed for a number of ulterior and strategic motives.
Well, there is one qualification that needs to be flagged here. So if Iran chooses to go for a gun type device, which was like a Hiroshima type
Basic.
bomb, it can do so in a matter of hours.
You don't even need to test that. The like, Hiroshima
Yeah,
device
but
wasn't even tested. Yeah,
I mean, that could be a demonstration test
yeah,
that Iran has acquired. Iran can declare itself a nuclear weapon state,
yeah,
but it will not have the ability to deploy an operational nuclear deterrent.
yeah. It will not have a deterrent. Yeah, so
It will not
deterrent
have a
and yeah,
deterrent, it will not have a deliverable capability. And the key today is to have the ability to develop an implosion device and then to have it miniaturized so that it can be delivered by a ballistic or a cruise missile or an aircraft. Now, I'll give you the example of Pakistan. So, Pakistan conducted more than 24 cold tests from between March of 1983 until the mid 90s before it was able to deploy an air delivered weapon design on its fighter aircraft. And then it started working on a ballistic missile program around 1995. And during this time, 4 to 5 different designs were tested, which were then hot tested in the 1998 tests. So every country that has built a weapons program has invested in the nuclear fuel cycle and the weaponization and the delivery systems in parallel with one another. And the P5 countries, especially the United States, for example, they stopped producing fissile material by the late 1980s or early 1990s. But most or all of their nuclear weapon labs, they have continued to work on different types of weapon designs. And they are believed to have been still conducting some kind of subcritical or hydrodynamic tests. That is the only way warheads are miniaturized. So that is a very long process that requires sustained investment. But if Iran chooses to go for a gun type device, a Hiroshima type bomb, they can do that, but that will be militarily ineffective.
It's interesting that you bring this up because if you go back in history and look at the South African nuclear program, the South Africans had six weapons by the end of the 1980s, but those were gun type weapons, but they did not have a deterrent. So they did not have a nuclear deterrent, which so weapon that could have been mated with a delivery vehicle and act as a deterrent. So uh, it, South Africa had a similar uh, so-called strategy that it only had gun-type weapons, and when the Israelis offered South Africa tritium, and the South African official said, "We don't need we don't need that. We are only working towards a gun-type weapon." So yeah, I think that's a very uh, good technical backgrounder for
And
audience.
a gun type weapon will require a very large amount of highly enriched uranium.
Yes.
So Iran has about 400 kilograms, which is good for 9 to 10 devices. And these are implosion devices. These calculations are around 20 to 25 kilograms of weapons of highly enriched uranium that is weapons grade or equivalent to weapons grade, and those would be sufficient for 9 to 10 devices. But Iran would still need to go from 60% to 90%, and that would take a very short span of time. But nevertheless, it will still be short of acquiring a weapons capability.
Yeah.
And another point is that there are so many other NPT signatory states that have huge amounts of plutonium that is sitting there in the spent fuel of their power reactors. For example, Japan has around more than 45 tons of plutonium. All of that is under safeguards, and in Iran's case, those facilities are still under safeguards, and as yet, Iran has not abandoned and are not withdrawn from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
It is, I think you have ended your answer on a very pertinent note because I want to talk about safeguards. So you've done a lot of work on the NPT. The NPT is based on a grand bargain, and that grand bargain depends on this very idea that okay, you give up your sovereign right to develop nuclear weapons, and you will have access to nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, which does not preclude enriching uranium even up to the highest levels, and also producing plutonium. Um, and what is the guarantor is the safeguard system within that IAEA has under Article 3. Unfortunately, uh, both on both on June 13 and on June 22, and also in between, um, the three facilities that were targeted were all under IAEA safeguards. Iran, as you know, entered into a comprehensive safeguards agreement with the IAEA in 1974. It also had, for a certain number of years, additional protocol agreement with the IAEA. To me, the IAEA's response and reaction to um, the attacks on Iran, especially by a non-NPT nuclear armed state in Israel, have been very piecemeal. Um, so, as I said, safeguards lie at the heart of the NPT. Oh, do you think? I believe it's a big blow to the NPT. But what are your thoughts on how this has, as to whether this entire span of series of attacks, whether it has um, dealt a severe blow to the NPT or not.
Well, I think the erosion of the NPT has been going on for quite some time. And we've kind of reached the cusp of the degradation of the sanctity of safeguards and the fact that an NPT signatory state is no longer protected by the norms that were the basis of the grand bargain. But we need to go back to around 2005. Uh, so the India-US nuclear deal, I think, was probably the first major nail in the coffin of the NPT, because the not only the nuclear suppliers group, but the International Atomic Energy Agency also approved a nuclear separation plan for a non-NPT nuclear armed state only a couple of years after its second nuclear tests in 1998, in which it accorded de facto recognition of a very large part of India's uh, nuclear program uh, without any obligations that are mandatory for an NPT signatory state. So uh, they were now considered qualified for the grant of all kinds of civilian nuclear trade under safeguards, but that allowed India to divert its indigenous uranium stockpiles for fissile material production. Before the India-US nuclear deal, some of their top scientists were saying that they had to use their indigenous uranium for the civilian program and for the military program, and that was creating problems. But very interestingly, only a couple of years after the India-US nuclear deal of 2008 was finalized, India was able to discover large domestic deposits of natural uranium. And since then, it has continued to ramp up its not only natural uranium production, but all other unsafeguarded fuel cycle facilities. Now, in this particular case, an exception was created for a civilian program because much of India's nuclear energy program that is supposedly civilian is outside safeguards, including its fast breeder reactor program, including much of its nuclear fuel cycle, uranium enrichment, and reprocessing program. Now, India uses the same argument uh, that Iran is using for its uranium enrichment program, which is that it is for submarines propulsion, basically. And they are saying that we are only enriching uranium up to 35%. So Iran is using the same argument, saying that uranium is being enriched for civilian purposes. But as I said earlier, because much of the effort from 0.7% of uranium 235 occurring in natural uranium up to about 5% of enrichment for power plants, much of the effort towards weapons grade is already completed between 0.7% to about 5%. So, in terms of the proximity with weapons grade levels, I think India is also very close to weapons grade levels, and there is no system of inspections and safeguards in India's case. There is still a system, however imperfect, in Iran's case. At least Iran is still a member of the NPT. So I think that one exception was created, and in this particular case, despite the fact that Iran has not yet abandoned the NPT or withdrawn from the NPT, I think these attacks took place. Now, the attacks took place on primarily the centrifuge plants at Fordo and Natanz, and the uranium conversion and uranium metal production plants at Isfahan, which is basically the bulk of the front end of the nuclear fuel cycle.
Also, they
Um,
also, the Isfahan plant also does fuel fabrication, of course, as you said.
yes.
Yep.
So Iran has, we really don't know. The bomb damage assessment is
Yeah, we
not,
can't.
we don't know but Iran has over the past 2.5 decades developed an homegrown capability to produce not only gas centrifuges, but all other aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle, including the production of the uranium hexafluoride gas feedstock. So even if those facilities are destroyed, they will be able to rebuild the essential elements of the nuclear fuel cycle within a short span of time. And then there are, if Iran chooses to leave the NPT, then of course it can move towards a dedicated nuclear weapons program. It will still take them some time to build a device that is deliverable by a ballistic or a cruise missile. And Iran has been investing more in its conventional missile program than it has in its nuclear program. So I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think you've raised a very good point. I, for one, believe that currently the NPT does not remaining in the NPT does not serve any practical purpose for Iran. Maybe it is. Maybe it would like to use uh, that the threat of leaving the NPT as a leverage and probably if the negotiations were to begin in the weeks to come, because it could use that as a bargaining chip. Um, uh, I think early morning, the Iranian parliament ended all kinds and types of cooperation with the IAEA, and that is also going to be a very problematic thing for the non-proliferation regime in general and for the IAEA safeguards program in particular. Um, so let us now switch to the crisis in May, the 4-day, 87-hour crisis between India and Pakistan. Um, Over the past so many years, you have been very vocal about India's both nuclear and conventional modernization. Um, in the past two or three crises, India has been trying to create. So, first, it was India trying to exploit a small band to carry out limited war operations. Now, I think India is looking for what some people have called an open conventional field to operate at will. So, with every passing crisis, the first the first salvo, the intensity of the first salvo is increasing. Um, uh, so, I want to get your sense of the dynamics or the strategic rationale rather, which was at play in operation while conducting Operation Sindoor, and then we'll take it forward from there.
So in India's case, I think we should not have been surprised at the way India acted in Operation Sindhu, for the very simple reason that if you look at their joint doctrine and land warfare doctrine, so their language over that was the first time that their operational doctrine or doctrinal thinking was put on paper in such an articulate manner. So India has been building the capacity for conducting counterforce strikes. And it is also not a coincidence that, along with India's investments in conventional counterforce capabilities and dual use counterforce capabilities, there have been sections of India's strategic community calling for a revision in their no first use doctrine, including their defense minister Rajnath Singh going to Pokhran and saying that India's NFU was not etched in stone.
Yeah.
And the former head of India's Strategic Forces Command, Lieutenant General B.S. Nagal, saying the same thing, among
He,
other
in fact,
people.
wrote a chapter in a
Yes.
book. And then Shiv
So,
Shankar Menon, of course.
yes. So, all of this needs to be seen in conjunction with each other. So, India is essentially pursuing a strategy of damage limitation, a damage limitation strategy in which they can attempt decapitating large-scale shock and awe conventional counterforce precision strikes, while building some kind of missile defenses that will protect their main leadership and population centers, and hoping to conduct a large-scale campaign that takes out command and control deployed strategic forces during a crisis. And for that, they've been raising a triad of not only the BrahMos, but Nirbhay and now Agni Prime, and a host of other dual use capabilities. They're also working on a hypersonic version of the BrahMos. And they're planning to equip almost all their fighter aircraft with different types of standoff weapons and air-launched cruise missiles that can be used in a counterforce role, along with the BrahMos launched from naval ships and also ground launch systems. So so the BrahMos incident that we saw in 2022, that was also apparently kind of it points to the same testing phase of India trying to push Pakistan's escalation thresholds, and by engaging in risk manipulation. And Sindoor, of course, was the first major manifestation of their strategy, in which they used this capability on a limited scale. They tried to test Pakistan's air defenses. Now, it's very interesting. The narrative coming out of India's different political and strategic circles. One was that they claimed to have defeated Pakistani air defenses. Now, Pakistani air defenses have only started maturing since 2015. It is still work in progress. Secondly, no country in the world has a foolproof anti-missile or system. Now, air defense is against aircraft and probably drones. It is not designed to intercept supersonic cruise missiles, even subsonic cruise missiles.
And what cruise missiles are very difficult to intercept even otherwise.
Yes, and what we've seen in the current crisis in the Middle East is that the state-of-the-art anti-missile systems have failed to intercept all the incoming projectiles.
In fact, just yesterday, out of the 25 missiles that Iran fired, we saw 10 impacts, which is quite a big ratio.
So what they've tried to do is they've tried to engage in risk manipulation and very dangerous nuclear brinkmanship, if only at the rhetorical level, because the Indian military leadership probably was more rational than their political elite and their strategic elite. The other thing was that they've been claiming that that Pakistan launched a Shaheen missile and they intercepted a Shaheen missile, which is absolutely incorrect. But the fact that they are trying to convince themselves that they were able to strike Pakistani bases with their cruise missiles and at the same time intercept a supposed Pakistani ballistic missile strike, which never took place, is very delusional, but it is also very dangerous. So what we've seen is that this was an exercise in nuclear brinkmanship, although on a limited scale. They were not expecting Pakistan to respond in such a calibrated manner. I personally think Pakistan's response was still measured. It was still very calculated and very restrained. It could have been at a much larger scale, but then that could have also, like it was stated by the former foreign minister, that Pakistan had locked around 20 aircraft and they shot down 5 or 6 of them. 6 of them. But so essentially, this is a pattern that we should have been aware of, that was waiting to happen. And probably now, given the lessons of how this episode, this crisis unfolded, I think one lesson that came out very clearly was that India does not have a clear conventional edge over Pakistan. So I'll just give you some numbers. So the Indian Air Force, it has a sanctioned strength of 42 fighter squadrons. It is down to 31 fighter squadrons, and will come down to around 28, 20, or 29 squadrons when they retire the remaining Jaguars and the MiG-21s. Um, in land forces, given India's two front commitments uh, along the line of actual control with China, I think Pakistan has achieved a certain level of parity on the ground. Now, India has four offensive strike corps. Two of those are deployed along the line of actual control, one of which can be repositioned against Pakistan, but Pakistan already has two strike corps. They have around five reorganized army planes infantry divisions, which are partially mechanized. They're not fully mechanized. Pakistan has at least two fully mechanized divisions, and for a force of around 560,000, Pakistan has a higher density of armor, artillery, especially in artillery in terms of the self-propelled artillery. So Pakistan has a 6-to-1 superiority over the Indians. Um, and in terms of mechanization, Pakistan has more APCs than India has. India is still relying on the BMP, the old Soviet uh, era vehicles.
And on top
In
of
terms,
that, the India's mobilization problems still remain there. And as
yes.
you know, the biggest reason behind toying with cold start for a number of years was the inability of the Indian Army to mobilize during Operation Parkaram. So Pakistan has that mobility edge, in which Pakistan can trade space for time. And in an operational area, you talked about parity. I think we have, in some cases, we have operational superiority, like deployment and using whatever capabilities and numbers we have in a given area, in a given AOR. So I think we have operational superiority at some along
So,
vital axes on the border.
so the Indians still have a clear superiority in the naval domain, in the maritime domain. But even there, like 10 years ago, Pakistan had a very small navy, around nine obsolete frigates, and only three really modern submarines. Now, eight modern AIP equipped submarines are on order. Two of those have been launched and will soon join the Pakistani fleet. And over the past couple of years, Pakistan has added at least 12 major warships and has started its own indigenous Jinnah class frigate program. So the numerical superiority that was there is narrowing down to Pakistan's advantage for a coastline that is of only 1,000 kilometers. India will always have a numerical edge in terms of the numbers, but Pakistan will have a very effective and a very potent, credible deterrent capability in place, even in the naval domain over the next couple of years. The other important point that I wanted to flag was that while all this is going on, India has continued to invest in its own conventional force modernization. They are not sitting idle in the conventional domain as well. They have massive acquisitions. But the more problematic thing in terms of strategic stability is India's investment in its latent nuclear capability, especially their nuclear submarine program, their fast breeder reactor program, and their fissile material production capability, and the stockpiles of weapon usable fissile materials that are outside the safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And I've been writing about this for a very long time. So in as a consequence of the India-US nuclear deal, and of course as a consequence of India's own indigenous efforts, they've managed to ramp up fissile material production both in terms of highly enriched uranium and but particularly plutonium. So India has been working on its fast breeder reactor program since 2004, and now they've just started commissioning their first prototype fast breeder reactor last year, which will exponentially increase their ability to produce weapons grade plutonium. Currently, they have only one production reactor, 100 megawatt, which produces around 24 to 26 kilograms of weapons grade plutonium per year. But once the first prototype fast breeder reactor, 500 megawatt, is commissioned, it is expected to be commissioned by next year, the annual production of uh, weapons grade plutonium will increase from 24 kilograms to around 180 kilograms, because each prototype fast breeder reactor will be able to produce around 140 kilograms of weapons grade plutonium, and you only need 4 kilograms of plutonium for a modern device. And India has plans for an additional 5 fast breeder reactors. And they are also commissioning a very large reprocessing plant complex, which will take their reprocessing capability from the current 350 tons per year to around 1900 tons per year. Same goes for uranium enrichment. I mean, they will have around 150,000 separative work units from around 50,000 that they currently have. And that will be sufficient to not only fuel their nuclear submarine program, but also at least a large arsenal based on highly enriched uranium, which can also be used in thermonuclear devices. But currently, India already has a huge stockpile of around 11 tons of separated civilian plutonium, which is also known as reactor grade plutonium, uh, and that is outside safeguards of the IAEA. So cumulatively, this gives them the ability uh, to assemble an arsenal of around 3,000 warheads. Now, I'm not saying they have that many warheads, but they have the technical capacity to produce 3,000 warheads in a matter of weeks if they choose to weaponize
The
that fissile material.
ENR, they have the ENR, which is critical to having latency. And I think if the world is fixated on Iran, which does not have anything like that for now, I think India's growing conventional capabilities, nuclear capabilities, conventional capabilities, and latent nuclear capabilities should also be a cause of concern, especially as you said, all of these are outside of the IAEA safeguards. So
And And India is now already they're in the process of commissioning their third ballistic missile nuclear powered submarine, and they have plans for even more advanced submarines. So, which will be probably completed around 2035. And those are all indigenous submarine programs. Uh, Initially, they received substantial Russian assistance. But once that those fleet of around 6 or 7 SSBNs is in place, they will be able to deploy around 250 to 300 warheads on the submarine launched ballistic missiles on the naval leg alone, depending on the configuration of the MIRVs, K5 and K6 MIRV capable SLBMs. Uh, well, though ostensibly those are being developed for China, but the same can be used against Pakistan also.
of course, that's very obvious that weapons that you just need to turn the side, and the weapons that can be used. So the weapons that can be used only for Pakistan, they can't be obviously used for China, but China specific weapons can, if and when required or wanted, be used against Pakistan at will. Um, so this brings us to a very interesting debate that is taking place between a number of scholars, uh, not in a very scholarly way. Like the debate is not, it has not pervaded or permeated in scholarly writing so far, but there is tension. There are two schools of thought. Um, that's about strategic chain and what Dr. Akhtar has termed the tetraplex. So we know when we talk about arms control, when we talk about non-proliferation, and when we talk about the nuclear order, which I believe is in disarray, there is no nuclear order, so to speak, as of today. Um, so obviously, um, Russians have the most number of deployed nuclear warheads, followed by the US. Um, they are not engaged in arms control talks. China is not interested in arms control. So this argument that okay, global nuclear power competitions between among China, US, and Russia will have a direct impact on India and resultantly Pakistan. To me, it is very logical and compelling. Uh, and you have also done some work on strategic chain. What's your take on the matter? Or what's your take on this entire strategic chain debate and whether Pakistan falls at the tail end of that?
Well, you just mentioned that India probably cannot use capabilities that it has for Pakistan against China. Well, it can because of the geographical proximity and because of the fact that it can deploy, for example, artillery, infantry, aircraft. Now, what has been happening is over the past, since Doklam and
Yeah.
specifically since the
Galwan.
Ladakh crisis,
Yeah.
Galwan, that India is now deploying all of their high-tech systems that it is acquiring, the high-end conventional weapon platforms against both Pakistan and China. For example, the S-400 batteries,
Yep.
the Rafales, the new types of artillery systems that they've acquired from the United States, uh, even the anti-submarine warfare maritime patrol aircraft P-8I for signals intelligence, etc., against both China and Pakistan. So it has entangled itself in a situation that is increasingly becoming like a self-fulfilling prophecy of a two-front war. Precisely because it refuses to engage with Pakistan and refuses to entertain Pakistan's proposals for a strategic restraint regime.
Since
Now,
1998. Yeah.
since 1998. Uh, but having said that, the I don't have much hope for arms control for the foreseeable future. I think regional arms control, either bilateral or multilateral, is not a realistic proposition anymore. Uh, so, if you take the Chinese position on arms control, now the United States is keen to engage China in nuclear arms control. But China's position is that if it has to sit at the table with the United States, then the other two NATO nuclear powers, namely France and
Great
Britain,
Britain.
they need to be brought under arms control negotiations also from a Chinese perspective. The second thing is that China is still not there. It still needs some time before it can, reach a comfortable level which it sees for itself before it will have leverage uh, for some kind of a reasonable arms control arrangement that suits its own interests. But that is also a way for China to gain more time to modernize and expand its own nuclear capabilities because its triad is not as mature as as the triad of the United States. And given America's growing counterforce and missile defense deployments and capabilities, I think China will have a will continue to have um, the drive to sustain its nuclear modernization program. Now, the Indian position is that we cannot engage with Pakistan because of the China threat. All right. But the interesting thing is that currently, in terms of at least fissile materials or fissile materials outside safeguards that India has, and the material that China has, both countries have weapons worth of around 14 to 1500 warheads. Uh, so you could argue, I'm talking about the weapons grade
That material.
potential and the separated civilian plutonium in India's case, not the entire stockpile that it has. And if that is to be seen, China, in the context of China having stopped fissile material production, along with the United States and others as late as the 1991, 1992, I think India continues to have an advantage because it has never stopped producing fissile material for nuclear weapons. The other important thing to see is that India started working on its fast breeder reactor program around 2004. China only started working on its fast breeder reactor program in 2017, first fast breeder reactor. But the common thing between India and China is that they're both claiming that their fast breeder programs are for civilian purposes, when in fact they are dual use. They're not for civilian purposes. So, having said that, I think in terms of the asymmetry in capabilities, um, China will continue to invest till it reaches a state where it sees itself comfortable to engage in arms control with the United States. That will propel India to increase the size and the efficiency of its own arsenal, especially the nuclear submarine force and its weapons grade stockpile. And then there is the question of the fissile material cut-off treaty
Of
in
course.
the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, which is the only multilateral forum that is out there that can uh, that can probably provide um, some semblance of order if it is pursued in a judicious and an equitable manner, in the sense that it also accounts for the
Existing
asymmetries,
stockpiles.
existing stockpiles, and also, in addition to existing stockpiles, it needs to expand the scope and definition of what exactly is fissile material, not just weapons grade materials. What about if the same argument is being applied on Iran having 60% enriched uranium, which is considered by Western and other analysts to be near weapons grade, and if that is a proliferation threat, then all other stockpiles of highly enriched uranium for nuclear propulsion or for submarines should also be considered to be a proliferation threat, because they can quickly be converted into weapons grade stockpiles. The third thing is, and probably the most important thing, is that of civilian plutonium. And this applies not only to India, it also applies to all other NPT or threshold states, such as Japan and South Korea. It is the presence of the huge amounts of civilian plutonium outside safeguards, which is very much weapon usable. The United States conducted tests using reactor grade plutonium in the early 1960s. And it shared that data with France in the 70s. And France, up till that time, did not know that it could use civilian plutonium for weapons purposes. And that was also declassified by the US Department of Energy around 1997 as part of an interlaboratory study by the US Department of Energy that says that civilian plutonium or reactor grade plutonium can be used to produce efficient nuclear warheads of any desirable yield. So, when there are huge stockpiles of civilian plutonium outside safeguards, especially in India. In other non-NPT states, they are still under safeguards. And much of the IAEA's budget in terms of safeguards is spent on monitoring Iran's nuclear program and Japan's nuclear stockpiles. But in India's case, those stockpiles are outside safeguards. So if you're talking of a tetraplex in terms of arms control, I think it's very, very complicated. It's not, there is no simple answer to this. And Pakistan sits at the end of the spectrum in the sense that anything that happens in India's program that is considered as perceived to be a threat to the credibility of Pakistan's deterrent posture will have to be responded to in an effective manner. Now, as I said, India may or may not weaponize this unsafeguarded stockpile, but it gives it a breakout capacity, which is far greater than the breakout capacity that is there in Iran. Because in India's case, it's outside safeguards.
And what's more worrying is that while all eyes are on Iran, eyes and ears are on Iran, India goes scot free or is allowed to go scot free. And this dichotomy is, to me, going to rupture whatever is left of the NPT centered non proliferation regime. And we can have prepcoms and revcons all along, but the very sacrosanctity of the NPT is being tarnished by developments like this. Um, I think you have really done a good job of contextualizing the entire landscape. Uh, I just need to add one thing. When you talk about India's unsafeguarded fissile material and its propensity of having that breakout capability, uh, what we also need to look at is the politics that is driving India, the leadership. Um, if you have, I remember when the Rafale aircraft were delivered to India, uh, uh, an entire puja program was done by Rajnath Singh with the aircraft. So this ideologically driven political scaffold and decision making, when coupled with nuclear weapons, is not good news for whatever is left of the global order. Your take on this?
Yeah, before I answer this question, there were two supplementary points. So I mentioned earlier that India was trying to pursue a strategy of damage limitation. So they're doing it through conventional counterforce and nuclear counterforce also. And they're principally aiming for nuclear superiority because of the fact that they will not be able to achieve an overwhelming or a decisive conventional operational edge over Pakistan or China. They will, they might be the first ones to go nuclear in a future crisis. And regardless of the NFU, the other thing is that you will see that there will be, if you look at the number of tests that have been going on over the past decade, those tests are principally of dual use missile systems, especially the BrahMos. Now, the Indian claim is that the BrahMos is not under the Strategic Forces Command, hence, it is conventional. But the Indian Cabinet Committee on Security many years ago had designated that at least a few dozen of BrahMos would be mated with the Su-30 under the SFC, which means that it also has, there is a version of the BrahMos that can carry a nuclear warhead. They're also working on the Nirbhay, which is a subsonic but a much longer range nuclear capable system, which will have a heavier payload. The Agni Prime under the SFC. And probably also they might also be working on other types of dual use systems. So their hope is to conduct a decapitating first strike that they think that in which they think they might be able to kind of defang Pakistan's strategic forces, command and control. That will not happen in any realistic time frame or in a future crisis, because no country has that ability to do so, even at the scale of the Americans trying to do that against Iraq's Scud launchers in 1991. But it is very dangerous nuclear brinkmanship,
It is.
which can lead to vertical escalation. The other important point to understand is, if you go back into history, I think it doesn't really matter if it's the BJP or the Indian Congress. I mean, it was the Congress that started the 71 war. It was the Congress
Exactly.
that used a civilian research reactor
Canadian
for
reactors.
military for weapons purposes and conducted the 1974 nuclear weapon test. It was the Congress that restarted India's nuclear
Missile
weapons
program.
program in the 1980s. And the BJP is just more vocal. Their style is more um aggressive, and they're more rhetorical, and they like to milk the nuclear cow in the in the sense that for political purposes. But I think as far as the nuclear program is concerned, there isn't that much of a difference between the Congress and the BJP, and especially when it comes to Pakistan.
While I agree with this lack of difference, I think still the ideological fervor that is ongoing in India, it has a very revisionist or a revanchist color to it. Akhand Bharat taking over territory. They have been saying that we will take over Azad Kashmir. So that you mentioned how when Rajnath Singh went to Pokhran, when he talked about the NFU, in the same breath he said we will take over GB and Azad Kashmir. So when a revisionist state, which is also ideologically driven, toys with or tinkers with its nuclear doctrine, I think it becomes doubly dangerous. And you also talked about NFU. I think, as you know, NFU, the the value or the sacrosanctity of the NFU, as claimed by India, it has not been eroded just by statements from Menon and Rajnath Singh and others. If you go back to a speech made by Vajpayee right after India released its TND in August 1999, Vajpayee explicitly said that India would not start a process that may lead to the first use of nuclear weapons. So I think since the very beginning, um, this NFU is a very questionable part of India's nuclear doctrine. And I admit that when we are in a state of war and crisis, these doctrines don't hold much value.
So there are two things to it. The first is that the doctrine is the first thing that goes out of the window when the
Yeah.
conflict begins between a full-scale conflict between two nuclear-armed states.
Yes.
The other thing is that India has been investing and deploying and integrating capabilities for counterforce.
Yep.
As I mentioned earlier, some of these capabilities are dual use. So they have in place a credible arsenal that provides them sufficient operational flexibility to conduct counterforce without having to officially amend their declaratory policy of no first use. If there is a conventional counterforce strike against during a crisis against Pakistan, which is specifically aimed at a deployed strategic system, a mobile launcher, a command control site, or any other place of strategic value that is deemed by the Pakistani NCA as critical, then it will be taken as a nuclear first strike by Pakistan and will be responded to accordingly. This is common sense.
Of course.
And that's why I mentioned that this is very dangerous brinkmanship that they're engaging in, and they are deluding themselves into believing that they could probably get away with it without escalatory consequences. Um, and the other thing is that nuclear use is defined by thresholds for any nuclear armed state. And those thresholds are determined by developments on the ground or in the air or at sea in terms of operational objectives. If if there is a all-out war, like in last month, fortunately, there were ground forces were only engaging in non-contact
Yeah.
like warfare, like they were not fully, they did not cross the international border or the line of control. If there is a all-out war, and if the Indian side loses territory, or if there are unexpected losses, so I think in the third nuclear age, we need to also redefine the concept of unacceptable damage. The concept of unacceptable damage that we have from the Cold War was useful for that time period, but now that you have strategic conventional weapons coming into play, and the kind of damage that they can do, and the kind of precision strikes that can take place using conventional options,
We have
I
just seen
think
it in Ukraine.
yes,
Yeah.
you've seen it in Ukraine, and standoff weapons deployed for saturated attacks against critical targets on either side can lead to vertical escalation.
Yes.
So if things start going bad somewhere, I mean, if they lose one of their aircraft carriers, supposedly, so they've been trigger happy since Balakot. I mean, they were the first
Yeah.
ones to deploy the Arihant. That is a second strike platform. They deployed the Arihant preemptively, even though there was even no large scale mobilization across the border. Um, so this is uh, a template that we need to look out for in the future. I think there should be and plan accordingly, because that will require Pakistan to invest in greater survivability of its strategic forces, complete its nuclear triad, especially in the maritime domain, and also continue to invest in force multiplier technologies, which are also known as now emerging technologies or multi-domain capabilities.
Yes.
All of that needs to be at the forefront of prioritization of resources and R&D.
Uh, Thank you very much, Dr. Mansoor Ahmed, for um, giving such a, indulging in such a big menu of important things that should have been discussed. I know we could have discussed a lot about Pak-China relations and how they shaped the crisis, and how China's evolving role as a third-party mediator and somewhat of a party in Indo-Pak crises um, could could happen. But I think at the end you alluded to the idea of strategic non-nuclear weapons. I think that lies at the heart of the third nuclear age, and it it generates questions related to survivability, which, as you know, lies at the heart of deterrence, and also how states perceive what they've lost, the unexpected losses. So I believe deterrence going forward will be challenged. The good thing that has come to the fore in these two crises is that the very idea, we cannot conflate deterrence and nuclear deterrence are not synonymous. Nuclear deterrence is just a minute part of the broader construct of deterrence. And I think there's a program to be done on that particular topic in and of itself. So thank you so much once again. It was a pleasure.
One last point which triggered my mind. In Sindoor, it was repeated after Sindoor, also after Balakot, also it was repeatedly said by several Indian thinkers and strategists and thought leaders that they had called Pakistan's nuclear bluff.
Yeah.
So, nuclear weapons have a very specific role, which is to prevent the breakout of all out conventional war and to mitigate the risks of escalation.
Yeah. To the nuclear level. Yeah.
To the nuclear level.
Yeah.
But then there are huge conventional forces on both sides for warfighting purposes. And that is conventional deterrence, deterrence by denial, which proved its worth in last month. Basically, it proved its worth in 2019 again in May as well. And there is a huge conventional space before both sides reach the point of vertical escalation going to the nuclear level. So this nuclear bluff is again irresponsible. I mean, this is no nuclear armed state can be bluffed into using nuclear weapons unless its existence is at stake. And the military decision makers on both sides are rational actors, and they know what is at stake. And probably that is why the Indian Chief of the Defense Staff also mentioned that the element of rationality was sustained during the crisis.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Um, yes, so it was interesting that the dialogue happened just after the crisis, and both military um, chiefs were both the chief from India had a military chief. Pakistan, yeah, both military chiefs said this word about rationality, and I think yes, rationality, at least at the military level, helped keep the crisis in check. uh, I would end by quoting something from Bernard Brody's book, since you talk about this bizarre idea of calling the nuclear Buffy. In his book, Escalation in the Nuclear Option in 1975, he said, not every pinprick on the border or along the border can be termed as deterrence failure. Nuclear weapons are not meant to deter everything under the sun. And I think our conversations, um, both intellectual and academic, should drive home this point. Nuclear weapons is not the answer is not the panacea for everything that's wrong um, between adversaries. It has a specific role. It is fulfilling that role, and we have examples from other parts of the world where nuclear weapons have not deterred the possession of nuclear weapons have not deterred Iran and Ukraine from launching attacks on Israel and Russia, respectively. So here you have it. I once again would like to thank you for taking out the time to
Thank you.
join me on the podcast, and look forward to having more stimulating discussions with you on these and related matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much.